Good evening, and welcome to Perspectives, the program where we delve into today's most pressing societal questions. Tonight, we are tackling a profoundly complex issue. Should drug addiction be treated primarily as a health issue requiring treatment rather than a criminal offense? It's a question that sits at the intersection of public health, criminal justice, and human compassion. Joining us to explore this are two distinguished guests. Dr. Ben Carter, a medical doctor with extensive experience in addiction treatment, who advocates for a health-centered approach, and Ms. Olivia Hayes, a former prosecutor, who will argue for the continued significant role of the criminal justice system, perhaps within a more balanced framework. We will begin with opening statements, followed by rebuttals, a moderated discussion, and finally, closing arguments. Dr. Carter, if you would please begin with your opening statement.
Thank you, Sarah. For far too long, our society has viewed drug addiction through the lens of criminality, as a moral failing or a willful choice to engage in destructive behavior. However, decades of scientific research, particularly in neuroscience, have unequivocally demonstrated that addiction is a chronic, relapsing brain disease. It's a condition that alters brain structure and function, profoundly impacting an individual's ability to control their impulses and make rational decisions regarding substance use. Approaching addiction primarily as a criminal issue has proven to be a costly and ineffective strategy. It has led to mass incarceration, overwhelming our prison systems with individuals who desperately need medical and psychological support, not punishment. This punitive approach fails to address the underlying causes of addiction and often exacerbates the problem by creating a cycle of arrest, incarceration, release, and relapse. A health-focused model, on the other hand, offers a more humane and effective path forward. It prioritizes compassion, understanding, and evidence-based treatment. By destigmatizing addiction and increasing access to comprehensive treatment programs, including detoxification, therapy, medication-assisted treatment, and long-term recovery support, we can achieve significantly better outcomes. We see improved long-term recovery rates, reduced instances of overdose, and a decrease in the transmission of infectious diseases associated with drug use. Furthermore, treating addiction as a health issue lessens the burden on our criminal justice system, freeing up resources to address more serious crimes. Jurisdictions like Portugal, which decriminalized drug possession and invested heavily in treatment and social reintegration services over 2 decades ago, have seen remarkable success. They've experienced dramatic drops in problematic drug use, HIV infections, and drug-related deaths, without an increase in overall drug consumption. It is time we adopted a similar evidence-based, compassionate approach, recognizing that treatment, not punishment, is the key to addressing this complex public health challenge.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Dr. Carter, for your perspective. I certainly acknowledge, as any informed person must, the significant health component of drug addiction. It is indeed a complex condition that inflicts terrible suffering on individuals and their families, and access to quality treatment is undeniably crucial. However, to suggest that drug addiction should primarily or exclusively be treated as a health issue, thereby largely removing it from the purview of the criminal justice system, is to overlook several critical realities and potential consequences. Firstly, while an individual may be suffering from the disease of addiction, their actions while under the influence or in pursuit of drugs can, and often do, have serious criminal implications. We cannot simply ignore theft, assault, driving under the influence, or the violence often associated with drug distribution networks, merely because the perpetrator has an addiction. Public safety must remain a paramount concern. Communities have a right to be protected from drug-related crime, and the justice system plays an indispensable role in maintaining that safety and order. Secondly, for a significant number of individuals struggling with severe addiction, the criminal justice system, paradoxically, can be the very intervention that compels them to enter treatment programs they might otherwise avoid or be unable to access. Court-mandated treatment, Drug courts and diversion programs, when properly resourced and implemented, can offer a structured pathway to recovery that might not exist otherwise. Furthermore, we must consider the message that a wholesale shift away from criminal sanctions for drug offenses might send, particularly to young people, regarding the perceived seriousness and dangers of drug use. While I advocate for an expansion of treatment facilities and a more nuanced approach, I believe the justice system must retain its capacity to hold individuals accountable for criminal acts related to drug use, and, crucially, to vigorously prosecute those who profit from the misery of others through drug trafficking and distribution. A balanced approach, one that integrates robust health interventions with the necessary functions of the justice system, is in my view the most responsible and effective way forward.
Ms. Hayes raises valid points concerning public safety and accountability, and I want to be clear. Advocating for a health-led approach does not mean abdicating responsibility or ignoring criminal behavior. However, the question is about the primary response. If we consistently address the root cause, the addiction itself, through comprehensive treatment, we inherently enhance long-term public safety more effectively than by simply cycling individuals through the prison system. Incarceration for drug possession or use-related offenses often fails to provide any meaningful treatment. In fact, prisons can be environments where drug use continues, and individuals emerge with worsened health, increased trauma, and diminished prospects for reintegration, making them more, not less, likely to reoffend. Regarding the justice system compelling treatment, while it can be an entry point for some, it's often a coercive one, which can undermine the intrinsic motivation necessary for sustained recovery. There are more effective, less punitive ways to engage people in treatment, such as community outreach programs, accessible and affordable health services, and supportive social systems. Accountability within a health framework looks different. It involves commitment to a treatment plan, participation in therapy, and making amends where possible, focusing on rehabilitation and restoration rather than retribution. This approach ultimately builds safer communities by fostering recovery and reducing the desperation that often fuels drug-related crime.
Dr. Carter, your emphasis on treating the root cause is understandable, but I believe it perhaps oversimplifies the immediacy of the threat that certain drug-related activities pose to our communities. While long-term recovery is the ideal goal, we cannot afford to neglect the present harm caused by individuals whose addiction leads them to commit crimes that victimize innocent people. Waiting for treatment to work isn't always a practical option when public safety is actively being compromised. Furthermore, the sheer scale of implementing a purely health-based system to manage all individuals who currently interact with the justice system due to drug-related offenses is a monumental challenge. Where are the resources, the trained personnel, and the infrastructure to provide immediate, intensive, and sustained treatment for everyone, especially those who are not voluntarily seeking it? I also maintain that there must be a significant deterrent for those involved in the trafficking and distribution of illicit substances. These individuals prey on vulnerability and cause widespread societal damage. A purely health-focused approach risks minimizing the severity of their actions and could inadvertently weaken our ability to dismantle these criminal enterprises. Therefore, a balanced approach, where the justice system can mandate and facilitate treatment, while still imposing sanctions for criminal behavior, especially for more serious offenses and trafficking, seems far more realistic and capable of addressing both the individual's needs and society's right to safety.
Thank you both for those robust rebuttals. Let's delve a little deeper. Dr. Carter, Ms. Hayes has drawn a distinction between drug users and those who traffic or distribute drugs. How does a health-first approach differentiate its response to these distinct groups, if at all?
That's a crucial distinction, Sarah. A health-first approach primarily targets individuals whose main issue is their own substance use disorder. For them, the focus is on treatment, harm reduction, and support. However, individuals involved in large-scale trafficking or profiting significantly from the drug trade, particularly those who use violence or exploitation, operate on a different level of criminality. While some may also have substance use issues, their actions cause broad societal harm that warrants a criminal justice response, though even then, underlying addiction issues, if present, should be addressed.
Ms. Hayes, Dr. Carter speaks of accountability within a health framework. But how do you ensure personal responsibility is genuinely fostered when the primary label is patient rather than offender, especially if an individual is resistant to treatment?
That is precisely one of my central concerns, Sarah. While I support treatment, the concept of personal responsibility can become diluted if we remove the framework of legal accountability for actions that harm others. If an individual is resistant to voluntary treatment, yet continues to commit crimes, the justice system provides necessary leverage, not just for punishment, but to compel engagement with services they evidently need, but are unwilling to accept. It's about finding a balance between compassion and consequence.
A question for both of you. What are the most significant practical challenges, be it funding, infrastructure, or public perception, in shifting towards a more health-focused model, and how might they be overcome?
The primary challenges are undoubtedly initial investment in a robust public health infrastructure, more treatment facilities, trained professionals, and long-term support systems. Public perception also needs to shift, moving away from stigma towards understanding addiction as a health issue. Overcoming these requires political will, sustained funding reallocation from punitive systems to healthcare, and extensive public education campaigns.
I agree on the resource challenge. Transitioning requires massive investment. My concern is whether such a system can be scaled effectively to handle the sheer volume, and whether it can adequately address those who are not just users, but are actively involved in criminal enterprises that go beyond personal use. The justice system, for all its flaws, has existing infrastructure to manage high-risk individuals.
Dr. Carter, do you have a question for Ms. Hayes?
Ms. Hayes, given the high rates of recidivism for drug-related offenses within the current criminal justice model, and the frequent co-occurrence of untreated addiction and mental health issues in prison populations, how can we genuinely say that a primarily punitive approach is effectively ensuring long-term public safety, rather than perpetuating a cycle?
Dr. Carter, I'm not advocating for a purely punitive approach, but one that includes punitive measures as a deterrent and for incapacitation when necessary. The system is evolving, with drug courts and diversion programs aiming to break that cycle by integrating treatment. The failure is often in the lack of adequate resources for these programs within the justice system, not in the system's inherent capacity to address public safety or compel engagement.
And Ms. Hayes, a question for Dr. Carter.
Dr. Carter, if drug use is decriminalized or treated purely as a health issue, how do we prevent a potential increase in drug experimentation, particularly among vulnerable young people, who might perceive it as less risky or socially acceptable if the legal deterrent is removed?
That's a common concern, but evidence from places like Portugal, which decriminalized personal use, hasn't shown a significant long-term increase in youth drug use. Instead, resources shifted from punishing users to robust prevention, education, and treatment programs. The focus becomes honest education about health risks, rather than relying solely on legal threats, which often don't deter experimentation effectively anyway. Tonight, we've discussed the critical choice between perpetuating a cycle of punishment or embracing a future of recovery and public health. Treating drug addiction primarily as a health issue is not a soft option. It is the smart option, grounded in science and compassion. It acknowledges the biological underpinnings of addiction and offers pathways to healing, rather than simple condemnation. The long-term benefits are undeniable. Reduced crime rates as desperation lessens, lower healthcare costs from untreated addiction complications, and more individuals returning to productive, fulfilling lives. We save lives, not just from overdose, but from the slow decay of potential that addiction inflicts. We build stronger families and safer communities by addressing the root causes of substance use, rather than just its symptoms. I urge a paradigm shift, a move away from the demonstrably failed war on drugs towards a system that prioritizes evidence-based treatment, harm reduction, and unwavering support for those battling this devastating illness. It is time to choose health, hope, and humanity.
Throughout this discussion, I have consistently agreed that addiction has a significant health dimension and that treatment is vital. However, we must not lose sight of the broader societal implications and the imperative of public safety. The criminal justice system, while imperfect, serves an essential function in holding individuals accountable for actions that harm others and disrupt communities, regardless of underlying causes. It also provides a necessary deterrent against activities like drug trafficking, which inflict widespread damage. Improved and expanded treatment options should indeed be pursued vigorously, but these should be integrated within a framework that also upholds the law and protects citizens. Treatment can be a powerful tool, and sometimes the justice system is the necessary catalyst for individuals to engage with it. Therefore, I advocate not for an either-or approach, but for a pragmatic and balanced strategy, one that enhances health interventions while maintaining the capacity of the justice system to address crime, ensure accountability, and ultimately protect our communities. This balanced path offers the most realistic hope for tackling this multifaceted challenge effectively.
Thank you, Dr. Carter, and thank you, Ms. Hayes, for a truly insightful and thought-provoking discussion on such a challenging topic. You've presented compelling arguments from both perspectives, highlighting the complexities of whether drug addiction should be viewed primarily through a health lens or one that maintains a significant role for criminal justice. It's clear there are deeply held convictions on both sides, rooted in different priorities and understandings of the problem and its potential solutions. We hope this debate has provided our audience with a richer understanding of the nuances involved and encourages further reflection on this critical societal issue. Thank you for joining us on Perspectives. Good evening.